The record that will never be broken by Motor Legends 1 year ago.
Every human has an innate desire to be remembered after they're gone. Whether it's for conceptualizing the world's first airplane or breaking the record for the world's longest fingernails. Whether it's being hailed for painting the Sistine Chapel or being an iconic grunge musician from Seattle. When the dust is settled, we want our legacies to shine on. Some of us use this as an encouragement to develop a unique skill, while others attempt to build lasting structures. But as a few outliers have realized over the years, sometimes all it takes to cement a name into the history books is one outstanding moment. Nowhere is this more true than in motor racing. Sure, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who isn't aware of the legacy that teams like the Ferraris, Porsches, and Audis have left behind. But other teams have realized that you don't necessarily need to shine like the sun for decades to be remembered by future generations. All you need is one spark of brilliance. Today, we're going to talk about one of those teams, a team that built a truly remarkable vehicle as a passion project, out of a private garage and with no full-time employees. This team never intended to be remembered for its efficiency, reliability, or even trying to win a race. Its sole mission was to make headlines for raw, unfettered pace. Like a shooting star lighting up the night sky, the vehicle it created would come out of nowhere to cement its legacy as being the fastest car ever at Le Mans before burning up on the horizon. This is the story of the WMP-88. The second half of the 1960s was a defining period for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was a decade marked by the Porsche 907s, the Ford GT40s, and the Ferrari 250s. Cars that lit up the track and magazine covers, setting new limits of speed and endurance. The excitement was infectious. Well, contagious enough to find its way into the Peugeot headquarters, at least. Now, Peugeot was no stranger to motorsport, being somewhat of a pioneer itself. Its early Type 7 won the world's first competitive car race in 1894, navigating the streets between Paris and Rouen at a speed of a little under 12 miles per hour. While this may seem underwhelming when compared to modern supercar speeds of over 200 miles per hour, it was quite a significant milestone for that era. Between 1910 and 1920, Peugeot scored victories at Indianapolis, and in 1926, it made its first Le Mans appearance, 3 years after the race was first introduced. But by the 1960s, Peugeot had decided against having a full factory team at the Le Mans, and had settled into its role as an engine supplier instead. For two of its engineers, the lack of sporting ambition was frustrating. The brilliant men in question were Gerard Welter and Michel Meunier. They had met on the job and bonded over their love for motorsport. As their friendship grew, Welter and Meunier realized that, despite working full-time at Peugeot, they couldn't resist the draw of Le Mans, which called out to them like a siren song from a sea of overachieving manufacturers. So it didn't take long before the duo merged their motorsport ambitions and their last names to create what we know today as Team Welter-Meunier, or WM. Despite starting out with some lofty goals, the WM project was never a full-time thing. Both engineers still needed to pay their bills, so they continued their day jobs at Peugeot. In fact, Welter, who was just 18 when he joined the manufacturer, went on to have a hugely successful career there, working on some of Peugeot's most iconic cars, including the 205, and crucially, as we'll find out later, the 405. So clearly, WM was just a passion project, a way for both men to explore the limits of their creativity. The humble WM's factory would be Welter's garage in the small French town of Torigny-sur-Marne, and its employees were a group of enthusiastic volunteers. But don't get us wrong, this wasn't your average DIY project. The WM team had a goal that major manufacturers of the time were pouring immense resources into realizing: winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That's right, we're not just talking about taking part, we're talking about going up against the likes of racing giants Jaguar and Porsche and winning. This meant that the men would have to work incredibly long hours, often through the nights and weekends, for what was essentially a side hustle. And that's exactly what they did. Just 2 short years later, in 1969, the duo unveiled their first car, a sports coupe based on the Peugeot 204. The following year, they developed the second prototype, a 1300cc mid-engine coupe, which entered into the 3-hour race at the 1971 Le Mans test weekend but failed to start due to a clutch failure. Simultaneously, at the 1971 Le Mans, the duo got a glimpse of what they were up against. British driver Jackie Oliver reached a speed of 246 miles per hour in his Porsche 917, setting a record and a benchmark for what WM wanted its cars to achieve. For WM, Jackie Oliver's feat sparked a fierce fire of determination. It would become the driving force propelling them forward and inspiring them to push the
I kind of respect it because they probably had no funding, that their own money, and again, like barely any help or parts and stuff like that, right? So like I feel like, you know, most people would be like, you know, there's no way we can win, we can do anything, compared to like massive team with massive amount of money and bikers. I don't know, I feel like most people would have given up before even trying.
boundaries of what they thought was possible. However, it took another 5 years before WM's first prototype would first reach its intended league, and it took a little help from its friends. Up until that point, Peugeot had been watching the progress of their two engineers with great interest, but had stopped short of offering any official support. However, in the build-up to the 1976 Le Mans, the Sochaux-based company couldn't help but get involved. It offered Welter and Meunier its support in the form of a 2.6-liter Peugeot V6 engine, originally used in the Peugeot 604 models, to help the duo realize their dream of entering the 24 Hours of Le Mans. These PRV V6 engines were jointly developed by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo through a 1966 agreement to develop common components. Eventually, WM created a chassis that fit the ACO, or l'Automobile Club de l'Ouest's GTP regulations. WM's P76 prototype landed on the Le Mans grid for the first time in 1976. Granted, only one prototype was sent to the Sot circuit on the day, and it would only qualify 38th and retire after 125 laps. But the results were far less discouraging than the final standing suggests. Peugeot's V6 engine gave the car an impressive 400 horsepower, enabling the homemade prototype to breach the 300 km/h barrier for the first time. Little did they know that this would only be a small sign of what was to come. Over the next few years, the team continued to develop new iterations of their prototypes, with varying levels of success. The most successful were the P79 and P80, which notably finished fourth overall at the 1980 Le Mans.
Wow, we're getting good.
1982 represented a turning point for Team WM. That year, the ACO announced the creation of Group C, and competition intensified. Even though Peugeot had fully thrown its weight behind the project, offering up a 2.8-liter turbo V6 engine, the underfunded WM team was finding it hard to keep up. Following another poor showing in 1986, the engineers were forced to review their goals. During this meeting, Welter and Meunier accepted that winning the Le Mans was firmly out of reach, as they simply couldn't muster up the resources to compete with the Porsches and Jaguars. So they decided, to hell with building a reliable race car. Let's pour all our resources into a new goal, smashing the top speed record. So in 1986, Project Win Le Mans made way for Project 400. A mission to create a car that would cross 400 kilometers an hour, or approximately 248 miles per hour, down the 3.7-mile Mulsanne Straight. Now, even for some of the more dominant cars of this period, this was out of reach. The record of the time, set by a Porsche 917, would require more than a simple design tweak to beat. It would require a complete overhaul. But if there were any two men up to the task, it was the new Welter and Meunier, who no longer cared about winning or reliability. They simply wanted to break records. Over the next year, Welter immersed himself completely in the car's aerodynamics, finding ways to ensure that the WM wouldn't just have a very low drag, but also enough stability for a driver to achieve the insane top speed. His efforts resulted in a body that was unlike anything seen at the time. The P87 was considerably wider than previous iterations, with a new nose box and side pods added to the existing chassis. This wide body almost completely encased the car's wheels, which significantly lowered drag and gave the car its clunky look. Peugeot, on its part, contributed all it could to the new car. For 4 months, it opened its wind tunnel, a specialized facility for automotive aerodynamic research that helps test drag, lift, and downforce, every Sunday for the WM. It also fitted the P87 with a 2.8-liter PRV engine with 2 turbochargers that had a total output of 850 bhp. In simple terms, the P87 was fast, and it didn't take too long to show it either. In between the wind tunnel tests and the race weekend, the car clocked a speed of 258 miles per hour on a closed-off section of a newly built highway, well exceeding the target. Unfortunately, to pull this off during the race, reliability would have to suffer. And predictably, a poor qualifying run ensured the P87 would start the 1987 Le Mans in the 21st position, out of 51 entries. During the race's opening laps, the car showed promise, managing to touch 238 miles per hour. But then, disaster struck. After 13 laps, the engine gave way and exploded cinematically onto the track. A few laps later, the WMP86 retired with similar engine issues, officially extinguishing any hope of achieving their goal that year. After all the hard work, this was a moment of crushing disappointment, to say the least. But at least this time, the engineers were confident it was only a matter of time before they broke the elusive record. Over the following year, the WM team persevered, working on yet another prototype. This time, the objective was even more cutthroat. The only goal of this P88 would be to last long enough to break that stubborn record. So rather than tinker too much with the body, all the team did was make small changes to increase downforce and stability. A new engine was also brought in for the P88, a 3.0-liter PRV, which produced 910 horsepower, 60 horsepower more than the last one. To hedge its bets, the team also entered the P87 fitted with the old PRV. As the 1988 Le Mans rolled around, the P88 qualified 38th and the P87 21st, but no dams were given. The WM team knew that this race was never theirs to win. All the cars had to do was last long enough to reach the top speeds Welter and Meunier knew they were capable of achieving. But on the day of the race, June 11th, the team's worst fears came true. The P87 retired after 22 uneventful laps. The P88, meanwhile, began suffering from the usual engine management and bodywork issues and was sent into the pits. The car stood stationary for over 3 hours. The team began losing hope. And we can feel their pain. Imagine having to sit still through the extended version of a Lord of the Rings movie, knowing that 2 decades of work was on the line. Agonizing, to say the least. But miraculously, the P88 survived the ordeal. After 3.5 hours, it was sent back out on track in the capable hands of Roger Dorchi, who immediately came tantalizingly close to breaching 250 miles per hour. After a few test laps, his team sent him a simple but effective message: turn up the boost. And just minutes before 9 p.m. on Saturday, June 11th, 1988, the P88 roared down the Mulsanne Straight at a record-breaking 407 kilometers an hour, or 252 miles per hour. The car broke down a few laps later, but no one cared. The WM team had achieved the unthinkable, smashing a world record held by a Porsche 917, with a vehicle born out of a part-time, underfunded French passion project. WM had rewritten history. Once the record was set and the champagne was poured, Peugeot had a request for its 2 brilliant engineers.
And I know from like some of the video I had seen about Le Mans that eventually they were scared of the speed being so high that they basically introduced a bunch of like in the super long straight part they introduced some kind of stuff so that people had to slow down and so that no one could really reach 400 km anymore and risk death basically. So I wonder if this is like the top record still, because no one is allowed to break it since they changed the rules basically.
The manufacturer was set to release the Peugeot 405 and thought revising the record would be the perfect way to market its new model. WM obliged, and the record was officially set at 405 kilometers an hour. As it turned out, a few kilometers an hour here or there wouldn't matter anyway, because the record would take something special to beat. In fact, the following year, Sauber Mercedes attempted to break it but fell short, only managing 400 kilometers an hour. Then, in 1990, authorities effectively put an end to all challenges to the throne by introducing 2 chicanes to the Mulsanne Straight. Now, for a car to even come close to breaking the record, it would take some serious innovations in motorsport.
Which is like, yeah, I mean, it's cool, but it's also kind of unfair in a sense, right? Like, it's a cool record, but the fact that like no one is allowed to break it because the rule changed, it's kind of like, yeah, of course it's not going to be beat, so it's kind of like, it would probably be beat by now, right? But it's still a cool record.
And so it ends with the WM Peugeot P88 having firmly cemented its legacy. On that fateful summer night in 1988, the Jaguars might have gone home with the victory, but the P88 will forever be associated with that race, and forever be remembered as the fastest ever car at Le Mans.
Very cool, especially like how long it took. I was thinking it was going to take a couple of years, but it took, what, 2 decades? Really, some determination there. So pretty cool, yeah. Very interesting story, and I enjoyed that. So, quite interesting. Here's a link. Very